Beginnings in the California suburbs. Julie's life in the quiet suburbs of California looked picture perfect from the outside. She owned a charming, sun-drenched home in a close-knit neighborhood, surrounded by winding streets lined with palm trees and blooming jacarandas. The walls of her modest house were a living gallery adorned with canvases of vibrant reds, calming blues, and untamed brushstrokes, each painting a piece of her soul, and each one somehow reflecting the California light that flooded through every window. California wasn't just a place on the map for Julie. It was the source of her inspiration. Mornings often found her on the porch with a steaming mug of coffee, sketchbook resting on her knee. As the coastal fog slowly lifted to reveal rows of pastel rooftops, the gentle hum of life around her, from the distant sound of kids on skateboards to the regular ring of the mail truck, offered a comforting rhythm. The backdrop to both her art and her family life. Julie had spent years pouring herself into her work and into her marriage with Robert. They met decades ago at an art fair in Laguna Beach, their hands covered in paint, and their laughter echoing over the waves. To their friends and neighbors, they were the quintessential creative couple. He handled gallery business, and she brought the art to life. They hosted lively weekend barbecues for neighbors and late-night gatherings with artists, curators, and dreamers. Their home was a crossroads for stories and ideas, a place where everyone felt welcome, where colors thrived both on canvas and in conversation. Her days were a comforting routine of creativity and simple joys. Early morning light washing over her easel. Quiet afternoons when the only sound was the scratch of a pencil or the confident stroke of a brush. And evenings spent sharing stories with Robert over dinner. Together, they built a life that, to Julie, was as carefully layered and thoughtfully composed as any of her paintings. She cherished this sense of order and harmony, believing it to be the solid ground beneath her feet. Yet, underneath the surface of this idyllic American life, complexities brewed, though not even Julie, with her keen artist's intuition, could fully sense them yet. For now, she moved through her days, believing in the beauty and safety of what she and Robert had created, unaware of the storm quietly gathering in the distant edges of their California sky. The mask of deceit. For years, Julie viewed her marriage as a partnership built on trust, one where creativity was their shared language and mutual respect was its foundation. But even the California sun casts shadows, and Julie was about to stumble into one that would alter her world forever. It began innocently enough. One afternoon, while searching for a paintbrush in Robert's studio, Julie noticed a receipt tucked carelessly between stacks of gallery flyers. It was for an expensive dinner at a restaurant she'd never heard of, paid for with their joint account. At first, she brushed it off. Robert often entertained patrons and collectors. But as the days passed, small irregularities began to stack up. Gallery invoices she didn't recall approving, artwork missing from her inventory, emails on Robert's laptop that were quickly clicked shut when she entered the room. The truth hit her in fragments, each revelation a fresh cut. The woman was young, elegantly dressed, working at the very gallery where so much of Julie's art was displayed. Julie saw her at openings, off in the background, laughing a bit too loudly at Robert's jokes, standing a little too close. Then came the crushing discovery. Her own paintings, given as gifts to the mistress, presented as symbols of Robert's supposed artistic taste and generosity. It wasn't just the infidelity that stung. It was the betrayal of Julie's art, the most intimate part of herself, used as currency in a sordid affair. The deception reached even deeper. Financial records began to show discrepancies, sums of money missing, works sold without her knowledge. Her creative life and her financial security were being undermined from within by the very person she trusted most. Julie felt the world tilt beneath her feet. The life she treasured, the marriage she believed in, was revealed as no more than a well-crafted facade. Friends and neighbors continued to see her as the gentle, devoted wife, while Robert maintained his image as the dutiful husband and respected gallery manager. Only Julie, and now the woman in the shadows, knew the ugly truth hidden behind their suburban respectability. Alone in the sanctuary of her studio, Julie stared at her half-finished canvases and felt anger mixing with sorrow. Yet, as she endured the heartbreak, something else began to take shape within her, a quiet, focused resolve. She realized that Robert's betrayal was not an ending, but a call to uncover the lies and reclaim her story. The silent power. Julie's first reaction was disbelief. How could her partner in life and art have betrayed her in such a complex, calculated way? But anger, humiliation, and sadness soon followed, churning restlessly beneath a calm exterior. To the outside world, Julie remained the same gentle artist, tending her garden and painting into the afternoon light, a picture of Californian composure and grace. Inside, however, her mind became a storm of questions and urgent, unfinished thoughts. What hurt most was not just Robert's infidelity, but his manipulation of the very things that made her who she was. He had taken her work, her colors, her stories, and twisted them to serve his secrets. The sense of violation ran deep, and with each new discrepancy she uncovered, Julie sensed that screaming or confronting him directly would only allow him to further twist the narrative, making her appear irrational or unstable to those around them. So, Julie made a choice. She would not be the dramatic wife who aired dirty laundry in public, nor the passive victim who faded into the background. She would become the silent observer, the architect of her own justice. A new resolve. In the weeks that followed, her daily routines altered. No longer was she solely focused on her art or on the rituals of domestic life. Julie adopted an air of studied nonchalance, feigning normalcy while her every sense became attuned to the details Robert tried to hide. Each morning, she woke with a new sense of purpose that coexisted with her creative drive. Her art began to change as well, colors and shapes turning sharper and more urgent, canvases bearing witness to her private struggles. At night, after Robert retreated to bed or left for urgent gallery business, Julie would linger in her studio, the house quiet except for the whir of the ceiling fan and the reassuring tick of the antique clock in the hallway. She opened her laptop and began tracing every paper trail she could access.
Thank you.
Bank statements, digital receipts, email threads, inventory spreadsheets. There was a new language to learn, the arcane details of accounting and digital forensics. But Julie was nothing if not a quick learner. For years, she had observed life at a distance, translating feeling into form. Now, she translated suspicion into evidence, piecing together the puzzle. Some nights yielded nothing but exhaustion, her back aching from long hours hunched over cold numbers. Other times, the smallest inconsistency, a misspelled vendor on a wire transfer, a late-night Venmo payment, a missing art piece from the studio closet, crystallized another fragment of truth. Julie filled old sketchbooks with charts, timelines, and coded notes, giving each transaction a color, each suspect email a number. Her process became a kind of art in itself, forensic and methodical, but always deeply personal. Rather than confront Robert with her discoveries, Julie treated him as she would a difficult subject in a portrait, watching quietly, searching for details in his behavior. She listened closely at dinner parties, noting when his smile tightened or his stories didn't quite add up. She watched his movements around the house, how he recoiled from certain questions or grew agitated at the mention of the gallery. If he noticed her change in demeanor, he never mentioned it. Julie also became more careful in her own interactions. She confided in no one, not even her closest friends. Her silence was both a shield and a weapon. She knew that in their circle, rumors traveled fast, and loyalties could shift unexpectedly. She tuned her instincts to every sidelong glance and awkward pause. Even the smallest detail could be the missing brushstroke in her developing portrait of betrayal. Control through quiet. The more Julie uncovered, the more she realized the power of her silence. In her world, where image and reputation meant everything, Robert was used to controlling the story, playing the charming husband and shrewd businessman to their peers. He never suspected the quiet strength accumulating behind her eyes, the resolve hardening with each sleepless night. Her restraint kept him off balance. The less she revealed, the more certain he became that his secrets were safe. But Julie's silence was anything but passive. She started to quietly immortalize her pain in her art, creating new works that carried hidden meanings and encoded anger. Her canvases grew bolder, with jagged forms and unexpected shadows, their surfaces alive with tension. Friends who visited her home began to notice the shift in tone. The energies changed,
Please,
one remarked after a
just hear
studio
me
tour.
out.
Julie simply smiled, offering a vague explanation about creative evolution. Every step was deliberate. Julie changed passwords on joint accounts, quietly cataloged her own paintings, and started backing up files to private drives. She created a paper trail of her own, preserving every shred of evidence with meticulous care. When she needed copies of key documents, she visited a local print shop miles away, careful not to leave a digital fingerprint at home. The more she uncovered, embezzled profits, gifts exchanged behind her back, coded messages in email, the deeper her resolve grew. Watching and waiting, above all, patience became her greatest ally. Julie understood that to confront Robert too soon would give him time to destroy evidence and manipulate allies. She needed the full picture, the entire story, before she made her move. She remembered the advice of one of her favorite artists growing up. Let the picture come to you. So she waited, watching him narrate his lies at gallery openings, privately recording every detail. There were moments when Julie doubted herself, alone in her studio at 3 a.m, staring at the accumulation of documents and wondering if she'd missed something vital. Sometimes grief overtook her, and she wept silently for the naive trust she once placed in her partner. But these spells passed quickly, replaced by the flinty determination that had carried her through a lifetime of artistic ups and downs. Julie's silence was neither apathy nor weakness. It was strategy, a calculated effort to reclaim both her autonomy and her story. She came to see her silence as a kind of power, one that allowed her to observe, learn, and plan without interference. In the hushed hours between midnight and dawn, she realized she wasn't just surviving, she was sharpening herself, preparing for a reckoning that would not only protect her, but expose everything Robert had tried so hard to conceal. The transformation of silence. Over time, silence became Julie's signature, both in life and art, where others sought comfort in quick confessions or explosive confrontations. She found strength in discipline and restraint. She began to understand that justice does not always require an audience. Sometimes it simply needs patience, intellect, and a quiet place to prepare. Julie embraced the slow-burning satisfaction of knowing she was steps ahead. As the weeks rolled into months, she grew more confident in her plan, shaping it as carefully as she would a complex mixed-media piece. Each component had to fit exactly, each move carefully timed. She watched, waited, and quietly gathered all she needed for the moment when silence would give way to undeniable truth. When that day finally arrived, Julie knew she would not raise her voice or demand sympathy. Her actions, precisely measured, thoroughly prepared, would speak for her. The artist who once poured emotion onto the canvas now poured purpose into every silent step, ensuring that when the final stroke was laid, there would be no doubt as to where the real power resided. The revenge plan. By the turn of summer, Julie's house in California felt less like a home and more like a theater set. Every gesture, every conversation, a rehearsed performance, beneath which her true feelings simmered. The betrayal she'd uncovered were no longer simply raw wounds. They had crystallized into a quiet, focused rage. Every sleepless night spent cataloging Robert's deceptions. Every forged signature and secret payout, tracked in her notebooks, gave shape to a new reality. Julie wasn't going to remain the wounded party. She was going to take control. From grief to strategy, Julie was raised to believe that dignity meant restraint, and California's polite suburban culture seemed to reinforce that at every turn. But now, she adopted silence, not as a shelter, but as a weapon. She refused to let Robert see her pain. Instead, she channeled it into methodical planning. She studied her husband's routines with the patience of a seasoned artist, observing the passage of light across a subject's face. She learned when Robert was most distracted, when he felt most secure, when he least suspected. Each habit, each slip, became a brushstroke in the portrait of her revenge. Rather than lash out or confront Robert directly, Julie's every move became deliberate and covert. She watched how he interacted with their community, how he maintained his image as the affable, trustworthy gallery manager, how he navigated their shared social world with a practiced charm. Julie knew that if she wanted to dismantle his world, she needed to do so where his reputation mattered most. In the public eye, in front of the friends, artists, and patrons who believed in the Robert and Julie story. Laying the groundwork preparation began months in advance. Julie duplicated bank statements, gathered copies of sale receipts for her artwork, printed email exchanges that documented financial transactions and intimate communications between Robert and his mistress. She secured these meticulously, hiding digital files under encrypted folders and keeping hard copies in a safe deposit box outside of town. Every document, every screenshot was dated, labeled, and organized with the precision of a trial lawyer building an airtight case. Still, evidence alone would not be enough. Robert was a master storyteller, capable of spinning any situation to his advantage. Julie needed her moment to be irrefutable and public. It had to be big, undeniable, impossible to reframe or cast as a simple marital squabble. If she wanted justice and not sympathy, her plan had to take on a life of its own. Then, one evening in early July, the perfect opportunity presented itself. The annual Summer Gallery Gala. This event was the social high point of their artistic circle, drawing collectors, critics, and journalists from across the state to celebrate a season's worth of new work. It would be the perfect stage. Crafting the moment, Julie set the date in her mind, then worked backwards. In the days leading up to the gala, she continued to act as the supportive wife, maintaining the facade she'd perfected. She met with friends for coffee, hosted garden brunches, discussed art techniques and gallery logistics with casual warmth. Meanwhile, she quietly spread word about a special announcement planned for the gala. Nothing ostentatious, just a hint of something newsworthy, enough to stir curiosity among the right people. She made a series of subtle, carefully timed changes behind the scenes. She withdrew her unsold work from the joint gallery, citing restoration. She met with an independent attorney to ensure her assets and intellectual property were protected, just in case the fallout got ugly. Most crucially, she reached out to two respected art critics, both of whom she knew personally, and both of whom had, at one point or another, quietly warned her about Robert's reputation for embellishment. Julie provided them with a taste of her documentation, just enough to ensure they would take her side seriously. In her home studio, Julie prepared a new series of paintings in secret, their colors electric and tempestuous, their imagery layered with symbolism, broken frames, emptied nests, golden cages. Each canvas exuded energy and pain, but also resilience. She titled the series Reclamation. These works would form the backdrop for what she hoped would be her most important public statement. The night of the gala, the evening of the event, the old Victorian gallery in Santa Monica buzzed with excitement. Guests in crisp suits and flowing gowns wandered between installations, champagne glasses in hand, chatting beneath the amber glow of Edison bulbs. Robert, resplendent in his favorite tailored jacket, worked the room as always, the picture of gracious hosting. His mistress hung quietly at the edge of his orbit, an open secret to some, invisible to others. Julie entered last, calm and composed, dressed in an elegant, self-designed gown that shimmered with midnight blue, its subtle gold accents echoing her new work. She moved through the crowd gracefully, greeted by colleagues and friends, her presence collected, but unassuming. No one suspected what was about to unfold. Precisely at 9 o'clock, she stepped onto the low stage, where a microphone waited. The room hushed. Julie thanked everyone for supporting local art, then paused. She addressed the crowd not just as an artist, but as someone who stood for truth and integrity in their creative community. As she spoke, Julie distributed elegantly bound portfolios to the art critics and key gallery investors, portfolios containing carefully chosen excerpts of financial records, correspondence, and timelines. She described, with calm authority, how her art had been used to deceive, how gallery profits had been embezzled, how trust had been broken in the space where artists should feel safest. Names were named, facts were sourced, and every revelation was backed with hard evidence. She didn't cry, she didn't rage. Her voice was steady, her posture proud. Impact and aftermath. The impact was immediate. Gasps filled the gallery, and the silence that followed was heavy with shock and recognition. As Julie stepped down from the stage, cameras from the local press already flashing, Robert stood rooted in disbelief, his carefully managed world collapsing in the space of minutes. Julie stayed only long enough to see her message land with precision. She did not gloat, nor seek out her husband's gaze. Instead, she walked towards her new series, allowing fellow artists and patrons to approach her first, not with pity, but with newfound respect for the strength she had demonstrated in reclaiming her art and her story. The hours that followed were a blur. Robert swiftly left the event, the mistress trailing behind him, while board members of the gallery gathered to discuss next steps. Within days, word spread through the art press and social media. painting Robert as a pariah and Julie as a figure of dignity and courage. The true portrait. Julie's plan was a testament to resolve, intelligence, and the long game of justice. She never once lost sight of who she was: a creator, a survivor, and, above all, an artist who refused to be sidelined in her own life. The gallery that had once displayed her most intimate work now bore witness to her greatest act, not of vengeance for its own sake, but of self-reclamation. Where others might have chosen fire, Julie had chosen light. Where others might have shouted, she had spoken with unwavering clarity. As California's dawn broke the next morning, Julie woke not just free of betrayal, but finally, irrevocably, in command of her own narrative, and all the beauty and power it could contain. The public showdown. The sun set slow and golden on the evening of the Summer Gallery Gala, casting long shadows across the creamy stucco buildings of downtown Santa Monica. By 7, the historic Victorian Gallery was illuminated inside and out with swirling patterns of light, its tall arched windows aglow like cathedral glass. The place buzzed with the anticipation of the city's creative elite: artists, collectors, journalists, and benefactors, circulating between wine bars and hors d'oeuvres stations, their laughter and conversation surfacing and ebbing like the tide just blocks away. Julie arrived fashionably late, pulling up in a rideshare rather than her usual sedan, a deliberate move meant to keep Robert uncertain. She stepped out quietly, her gown, midnight blue, silk, and subtly shimmering gold, catching the light in a way that immediately drew the gaze of onlookers. Her hair was swept back, but softened at the edges, and her only jewelry was a pendant she'd sculpted herself, a talisman of new beginnings. Each detail was intentional. Tonight, Julie was both the artist and the message. Inside, Robert floated from guest to guest, glass in hand, the consummate host. His laugh was audible above the hum, punctuating stories and jokes. The young woman at his side, a striking brunette with sharp cheekbones and a nervous smile, hovered at a polite distance, equal parts secret and accessory. To those in the know, her presence was the worst-kept secret in the room. To others, she was merely a gallery assistant doing her job. Julie traced a path through the crowd, her back straight, even as her nerves danced. She exchanged pleasantries, greeted old friends and critics, accepted compliments on her new work. If anyone noticed her tight smile or the way her eyes lingered on Robert's gestures, they chalked it up to the stress of show night. No one suspected the storm beneath her poise, the calm, before the evening unfolded in a slow crescendo. Toasts were raised, canapes sampled, rumors of a special announcement buzzed among distinguished guests. Julie kept a quiet watch on Robert, noticing how he slipped behind the scenes with his mistress, how he continued to bask in the warm glow of respect and admiration from people who'd only heard his version of their shared story. Julie's paintings, hung along the longest wall, attracted particular attention. The new series, Reclamation, was filled with uncharacteristically bold colors and emotionally charged images: fractured nests, broken golden cages, a solitary heron standing in a pool of midnight blue. Fellow artists remarked on the shift in tone. Some nodded in private understanding, recognizing the silent rage and renewal coded within each work. By 8:45, Julie excused herself from a conversation and headed to the upstairs office where the gallery manager was assembling press kits. There, she retrieved a slim leather folio. Inside, neatly collated, were bound copies of financial records, annotated emails, and carefully layered timelines. She took a moment to breathe, recalling every step that led her to this night. Fear flickered in her chest. but she held it steady, pressing her thumb lightly to the cool leather. The moment arrives. At precisely 9 o'clock, the house lights dimmed, gently signaling the start of the announcements. Robert was called to the stage first. He delivered an expected speech, thanking guests for their support, extolling the gallery's success, and hinting at major acquisitions for the season ahead. The crowd applauded, many turning to scan the walls, hungry for new gossip or art world intrigue. Then, the MC welcomed Julie to the stage. She took the mic, her voice low and calm, the measured tone of someone who needed no dramatics to command attention. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Even Robert's smile froze, uncertain. "Thank you for being here tonight," Julie began, gaze steady across the sea of faces.
Thank you for your cooperation.
Thank you for supporting local artists and for believing in the truth and integrity of art. Tonight, I have a different kind of unveiling. One that speaks not just to the work on these walls, but to the trust we place in those who represent us. She paused, looking directly at Robert. The room seemed to grow smaller, the air charged and suffused with anticipation. It takes courage to build something beautiful, and even more to stand up when that beauty is threatened. Over the last year, I have discovered that the person I trusted most, both as a partner and as a colleague, has used my artwork and our shared resources not in the spirit of collaboration, but for personal gain. A ripple of confusion ran through the room. A news reporter shifted, sensing the air of confession. Julie continued, lifting the folio from the
I'm not
podium.
sure what to do about
This folder contains evidence, bank statements, sales documentation, and a record of communications showing unauthorized transfers, gifts, and art sales. Tonight, I am offering these to art critics and gallery trustees not to wound, but to clear the fog and return ownership to those whose stories have been taken from them. She stepped down from the podium, distributing copies to select journalists and the board president. The act was quiet but definitive, a surgical exposure rather than the drama some expected. Shattering the mask, the silence that followed seemed to vibrate,
We have
as
to
though
find
the
it.
gallery itself were holding its breath. Robert stood rooted to the spot, the color draining from his face. Friends and acquaintances glanced at each other, some embarrassed, others angry at being lied to. The young mistress slipped away to the back hallway, her exit almost unnoticed in the confusion. A few curious guests thumbed through the documents, their eyes widening as the truth set in. Numbers, dates, and names spelled the end of Robert's charade. The local critics took furious notes. A journalist from the Los Angeles Times whispered into a recorder, preparing for a headline. Julie felt the weight leave her shoulders as reality settled over the room. She didn't gloat, nor did she break down. Instead, she walked calmly to her reclamation series, standing beside her latest painting as the crowd began to orbit her instead of her husband. One by one, friends, fellow artists, and even strangers approached, not with pity, but with a kind of wary respect. Some embraced her, others murmured quiet apologies for not seeing what was hidden so well. Ripples. Through the night, Robert tried to speak, his voice cracking, but was quickly shuffled aside by board members needing a moment. Phones buzzed with incoming alerts. Already, photos of the confrontation and hurried summaries were making their way onto social media. The gallery, once a cocoon of shared success, now hummed with speculation, accusation, and the unsteady thrill of public justice. Julie remained gracious but exhausted, accepting compliments, answering careful questions about her upcoming solo show, refusing to discuss details of her marriage beyond what was already documented. By the time the crowd thinned and midnight approached,
was always
Julie stood quietly
flowers.
near her artwork, watching the flickering lights spill across the floor. She realized she hadn't just saved herself. She'd reclaimed her future, her dignity, and the narrative that was always hers. The mask had shattered. Robert could never patch it together again. As she prepared to leave, a longtime friend took her hand. "That was brave," he whispered. "I hope you know how proud we all are." Julie smiled, tired, but truly seen. "I just did what any artist would do," she replied, her gaze set on the glimmer of first light outside. "I told the truth," and for the first time in a long while, the California night felt wide open, and Julie stepped into it unafraid. The unexpected outcome, the quiet that settled over Julie's life after the gallery showdown, was unlike anything she had ever known. For months, every day had felt like a balancing act, her world suspended over an abyss of secrets and unspoken pain. Now, the truth had crashed onto the gallery floor in front of everyone who mattered. In the hours and days that followed, a slow wave of change began to spread, not just in Julie's own home, but across the community she'd long called her own. Reverberations through the art world. The art world responded with the speed and tenacity of wildfire. By sunrise after the gala, social media feeds from Los Angeles to San Francisco were ablaze with speculation, photos, and commentary. Prominent art bloggers posted side-by-side images, Julie's new reclamation series, her calm stance at the podium, the shocked faces of patrons as the truth broke. The story was picked up by both local and national outlets within days, translating private pain into public narrative. For Robert, there was no hiding. His reputation collapsed almost overnight. Gallery partners called emergency meetings. Critical clients withdrew their support. Friends he'd cultivated for decades drifted away, unwilling to be tarnished by association, or faced with the uncomfortable reality that they too had missed warning signs. Some tried to reach out, but their messages went unanswered or were met with polite, chilly silence. Julie, on the other hand, found herself the subject of admiration and curiosity. Offers flooded in, journalists wanting interviews, advocacy groups inviting her to speak, artists sending messages of solidarity and recognition. At first, the attention felt surreal. She had never craved the spotlight. Yet, there was satisfaction in knowing her story was being told on her own terms, and that her silence, once dismissed as weakness, now commanded respect. Relationships rewritten. In the weeks following the revelation, relationships around Julie were rewritten. Some dissolved and others unexpectedly deepened. Neighbors who once pitied her now saw her through a lens of admiration. Longtime friends, initially stunned into awkwardness, grew more honest and attentive, apologizing for the small, unconscious betrayals of ignoring her quiet distress. Her closest confidants rallied, showing up not for the drama, but to restore the old rhythms of trust. Morning coffee visits, long walks along tree-lined streets, evenings spent talking about everything and nothing. Not every connection survived. A few acquaintances, uncomfortable with Julie's new assertiveness or reluctant to choose sides, drifted away. Julie mourned these losses quietly, but accepted them. In their place, she discovered an unexpected solidarity with other women, artists, business owners, even patrons, who had endured their own versions of betrayal and silence. Through these new conversations, she felt the shape of her community subtly changing. Boundaries set, stories exchanged, wounds turned into wisdom. The transformation of her art. Julie's artistry underwent a profound transformation. For years, her work had been characterized by tranquil landscapes, dreamy coastal palettes, and abstract images that shimmered with optimism. Now, her canvases bristled with energy. Bold brushwork, contrasting colors, fragments of text woven into the paint. She found herself compelled to experiment. Torn paper, found objects, even fragments of old receipts and bank slips layered beneath gesso, evidence turned art. Collectors who previously hesitated now vied for her pieces, drawn as much by the story as the work itself. Galleries in Los Angeles and New York reached out, eager to host solo exhibitions. A new audience emerged: young women, survivors, artists looking for authenticity and courage in a sphere so often obsessed with facade. Julie's Reclamation series sold out in days, the proceeds going partially to support a nonprofit she quietly established, one dedicated to empowering women artists navigating financial and professional abuse. These external validations mattered, but the most important shift occurred in the studio's solitude. For the first time in years, Julie painted entirely for herself. She worked late, unhurried, rediscovering not only her technique, but also the voice she'd nearly lost through years of compromise and collaboration. The studio became sanctuary and playground. Mistakes were allowed, new forms emerged, vibrant and wild, daring her to leap further. Newfound freedom. On the personal front, Julie faced challenges and opportunities she hadn't dared imagine months before. Legally, she navigated a difficult but ultimately fair separation from Robert, reclaiming her share of the marital assets and retaining control of her intellectual property. There were difficult negotiations, but armed with meticulous evidence, she refused to be bullied or gaslit again. With the house now her own, Julie made small but meaningful changes. The living room repainted a bold ochre, the backyard transformed with native wildflowers, every trace of the past reframed in creative defiance. She played her favorite music loud when she worked, cooked for friends, learned the pleasure of her own company. Loneliness, when it came, felt gentler than it once had. Washed clean, almost, by the honesty of recent events. Surprisingly, the scandal's aftermath brought opportunities for mentorship and community leadership. Other women artists, some much younger, reached out with stories of unequal gallery deals, credit stolen for their work, emotional manipulation, disguised as partnership. Julie responded not as a martyr, but as an advocate. She organized informal gatherings at her studio, launched workshops on artistic business acumen, and collaborated with lawyers to produce a guide for artists to protect their interests. It was exhausting, but exhilarating, a form of creation as essential as painting itself. A sense of resolution. Months passed, seasons changed. The California sky, once a backdrop for anxiety, now seemed boundless again. There were mornings when Julie woke and wondered whether the events of the gala had really happened, or if she had dreamed her own transformation. Then, the sun would filter through her studio skylight, igniting the colors on her canvases, and she would remember everything hard-won was still hers to keep. Robert's absence from the community was nearly absolute, but no longer painful. Occasionally, Julie heard rumors. He'd moved to another city. He'd failed to replicate his success. He was living quietly. She no longer cared for the details. He was now just a shadow on the edge of her story. The true miracle, Julie came to realize, was not in the punishment meted out or the applause received, but in the strange, unexpected fullness of her life after loss. Vulnerability had given way to strength. Betrayal had been recast as clarity. The devastation that once threatened to erase her identity had instead forced Julie to claim it, reinvent it, and share it on her own terms. She remembered with a smile the words of an old mentor. Sometimes, when a painting cracks wide open, light pours in exactly where you least expect it. Julie, at last, understood. Her life, like her art, was imperfect, layered, and infinitely more beautiful for its scars. In the end, the unexpected outcome was not justice served or reputations ruined, but freedom, the glorious, complicated freedom to be entirely herself. No longer hiding, no longer silent, but brilliant and whole in the bright California light. A new beginning for the artist. In the wake of chaos and revelation, Julie's world felt both strangely empty and brimming with possibility. Her story, once fractured by betrayal, now unwound in unexpected directions. The aftermath of the public confrontation and the reverberations across the art world left her standing at a crossroads, a place she'd avoided for years, too content in routine, or, later, too fearful of change. Now, the familiar comfort of her old life was gone, replaced by an exhilarating, if daunting, sense of freedom, reclaiming space inside and out. Julie's first act of renewal was simple and practical. She reclaimed her home, both as a living space and as a canvas for her rebirth. Gone were the reminders of her former life with Robert, the carefully curated but ultimately hollow decor that had played background to a relationship built on pretense. She painted walls in colors she'd long admired but hesitated to use. A bold ochre in the living room, deep teal in the studio, a dusty rose down the hallway. Every new hue became an oath to herself, proof that her tastes and choices mattered. Furniture was rearranged and, in some cases, replaced. She splurged on a worn leather armchair she'd always imagined reading in, filled the kitchen with sunlight and herbs, and hung artworks by fellow artists who inspired her. The process of renewal didn't just restore Julie's physical environment. It resurrected her old sense of curiosity and play. It was as if, by changing the space around her, she had invited new life into herself. Her home, once a stage for suburbia's performance, became a sanctuary where ideas blossomed, where laughter and tears echoed honestly, not stifled by shame. Friends said the house felt alive. Like you're finally here, they'd remark, not knowing how accurately they'd named Julie's transformation. The birth of her own gallery, with growing recognition and her independence reclaimed, Julie set out to realize a dream she'd put aside long ago, to open a gallery bearing her own name. Years of collaboration had built her knowledge of the art world's workings, its pitfalls, politics, and, above all, the sting of gatekeeping. Now, with her reputation burnished by her public stand, she had both professional cachet and a groundswell of support, especially from emerging female artists and advocates for transparency in the arts. It started modestly, a sunny corner storefront in her own neighborhood, surrounded by jacaranda trees in the familiar hum of California mornings. Julie's vision for the gallery wasn't about showmanship or profit. It was about creating an incubator for talent often overshadowed or dismissed. She handpicked her inaugural group of artists based on spirit and originality, prioritizing voices that questioned, provoked, or simply dared to be gentle in a world that rewarded only spectacle. Opening night arrived with little fanfare, but an abundance of warmth. Guests trickled in, greeted by Julie herself. The gallery offered not only art, but music, poetry, and local food, a celebration of the community's creative heartbeat. Critics who attended left surprised, noting the sense of authenticity and camaraderie that radiated from the space. Over time, the gallery grew into a thriving hub. It hosted workshops, panel discussions about integrity, and gender issues in the arts, and collaborations with local schools. Julie reveled in the role of mentor and cheerleader, as well as curator. She found joy in helping others launch their first shows, guiding contracts and negotiations with the hard-won wisdom born of her own history. The gallery's reputation spread far beyond the city for its inclusivity and bold programming. Julie did not become a gatekeeper, but a guide, determined that no one should experience what she had in silence. Art as healing, art as truth. The transformation wasn't just outward. Julie's creative practice flourished in ways she couldn't have predicted. If her earlier style had been defined by serenity, a longing for peace, her new paintings danced with tension and release. She poured the entirety of her journey into sweeping brushstrokes, layers of collage, and daring experimentations with materials. She found herself drawn to subjects she'd once avoided: vulnerability, survival, the body's memory of grief and pleasure. Her new canvases were celebrated for their honesty and for the sense of resilient optimism thrumming just below the surface. Sometimes she returned to old works and reimagined them, painting over past hopes with new visions, honoring the cycles of loss and renewal that had marked her life. Exhibiting became less about approval and more about dialogue. Each show was an invitation to conversation, a challenge to see the world as a place of transformation, not just disappointment. She was sought after for lectures and workshops, yet she always preferred the intimate setting of her studio talks, where the focus could linger on questions rather than answers. Julie also channeled some of her energy into supporting survivors of professional and creative exploitation. Through her nonprofit, she offered small grants, legal resources, and mentorship, a direct bridge between her own costly lessons and the strength she could lend to others. Bearing witness to the next generation's struggles and successes became a vital new form of creation, a living legacy more powerful than any single work. A life reimagined. Outside the gallery, life moved on, sometimes quietly, sometimes with wild new adventure. Julie traveled, visiting landscapes she'd only painted from memory: the red canyons of Arizona, the fog-draped forests of the Pacific Northwest, bustling cities from New York to Paris. Each journey fed her spirit and influenced her palette, introducing new motifs and textures into her artwork. She journaled, photographed, sketched in train stations and cafes, delighting in the unfamiliar. Friendships grew deeper. Love, when it arrived again, was met with clarity rather than caution. Julie relearned the rhythms of trust, discovering companionship in places she hadn't expected. With other artists, former strangers turned confidants, even with herself. The solitude that once felt punishing now became sacred. She cherished quiet nights on the porch, reflecting on sunsets transformed into color on her canvases. As months slipped into years, Julie could see the sum of her choices etched in both her art and her living. Wounds slowly closed, and, in their place, a fierce pride took root. Pride not in perfection, but in having risked, survived, and rebuilt. Her life became a masterwork unique unto itself, richly textured, bravely unfinished, vividly alive, standing in her own light. On the anniversary of the gallery's opening, Julie stood beneath a sprawling jacaranda, lavender blossoms falling around her, and looked at the gathering: friends, artists, new students, and supporters. She gave a brief speech, but ended with what mattered most to her. "Art saved me," she said simply, "because it made my life honest. I hope everyone who walks through these doors feels the freedom to create and to be exactly who they are." In the crowd, applause rang out, made sweeter by understanding. Julie smiled, her eyes shining with unshed tears and fierce joy. At last, her story was her own, and she carried it forward, no longer a survivor alone, but an artist, a mentor, and a beacon for others ready to step into the light.